and welcome to the anatomy and physiology, but mainly physiology of singing. Woo! Yeah! Singing! And today, we're mainly going to be talking about the physiology of breathing. Because when you sing, you gotta exhale a lot longer than when you're talking. Yeah, that's why we talk about breathing. Yeah. Woo! It's gonna be awesome. It's gonna be super fun. Maybe not fun. Hopefully. I don't know. I'm a little nuts, so some folks thinks that's fun, and some folks thinks that makes me dumb. Or crazy. So, you know, if I'm just too much obnoxious for you to handle, that's fine. It's okay. There are less obnoxious people out there. But, so, we're going to talk about that because it's true. You do have to exhale for longer when you're singing. Where you're breathing is marked in the music typically, or even if you're improvising a bit and you're going off cuff, you still want a sense of like when you're about to run out, right? And you want to go for longer. You want that big money note where you're holding it forever, right? And like the audience is like, oh my God, whoa, she like totally is busting out that money note. It's so amazing. Oh my God. Right? Because we got to make the dollars, right? For those who want to be pro. So you want to take probably a bigger inhale so that you can maximize your exhale and sing for a really long time and hopefully not interfere with your voice in the sense of like you're just keeping your voice nice and in good shape, right? And you know, your breathing is what makes your voice go, essentially your exhale. That airflow from your lungs goes up through your vocal folds. That's what sets them into vibration. That's what keeps them vibrating. And you got to do a lot of that when you're singing because like kind of a key part is having some vibration there. So to that end, we're going to talk about it. I have a couple of disclaimers for folks, okay? First one being, if you get a little lightheaded, I'm going to have you try a few breathing things, and if you get a little lightheaded during that, take a break, breathe like normal, because that lightheaded is a sign that your oxygen and carbon dioxide mix is getting a little off, and that makes your brain tend to panic a little bit. And, you know, one of the way your brain is going to reset your respiratory system, if it thinks something is going wrong in your respiratory system, your brain is going to make you pass out to reset it. So, let's not pass out, shall we? Let's just, okay, if you get a little lightheaded, just take a break, take a few regular breaths. Don't push through the lightheaded, because if you pass out, like, you don't need to pass out while you're practicing breathing for singing. Come on, people. Like, there is no need to put yourself through that. Hello. Also, as a speech therapist person, I gotta say, also bad for passing out is the chance that you might hit your head, and you gotta protect your brains, people. Wear your helmets. Traumatic brain injury is no joke. You do not want it. Aight? Alright, so, no passing out. Also, if you happen to have some really big respiratory issues, like if you have severe asthma or asthma that's difficult to control on medication, or you're short of breath, or you feel about air hunger, like you feel like you just can't breathe enough, you can't get enough air in your body right now, if you feel like your lungs are congested, like you might be getting bronchitis, or heaven forbid you have some sort of pneumonia or something, please see a medical doctor and a medical team about that. Please go to, like, you know, your pulmonologist, go to your general practitioner, get a referral to someone, whatever you need. This is not the place for you. If you need medical care involving your respiration system, do not pass go, do not visit WebMD, just go to a doctor, okay? Because, like I said, super mad crazy important that you breathe and you get that oxygen and that carbon dioxide, you get that ventilation in your body, okay? Right? Okie dokes. Now, so, I am going to be sacrilegious, you guys. I love it. I feel so rebellious as a singer. But I'm not going to talk about the diaphragm very much, or at least I'm not going to talk about it as a thing that you're going to have direct control over while you're singing. And there's two reasons for this, right? Because your diaphragm is a muscle of inhalation, and that means it contracts when you let air in, okay? It is relaxing when air is coming out of your body. And when you happen to be producing your voice is when your air is coming out of your body. You're exhaling, right? So it's not a muscle exhalation. It's not actively involved in exhaling. It's not actively involved, therefore, in the actual act of singing. It is involved in inhaling. But the other thing I don't like about talking, the only reason I really hate the phrase breathe through your diaphragm, like it's like nails on a chalkboard. And I know that's like super sacrilegious, and there's probably people out there who are like, this girl doesn't know anything. You have to breathe through your diaphragm. What? I'm going to turn off the video right now. But please don't, if you can stand me for a little bit longer. I don't like it because the other thing about the diaphragm is almost no one, like I've never seen a student come into my studio who has said that their acting coach or their choral director or their other teacher or whoever has told them to sing or speak or whatever from their diaphragm and actually know what the heck their diaphragm is, where it is in their body. Like, I don't think I've ever had that happen. So, a lot of times when I say, okay, where's your diaphragm, they point to their abdominals. And I say, okay, is it actually there, or is it like you can't quite really, like if you contract there, do you think that's your diaphragm contracting? And they go, yeah, of course, that's my diaphragm contracting right there. No, it's not. Okay. Diaphragm is really deep in your body. I actually have my handy dandy citation here, like some illustrations here. So this is your diaphragm in a skeleton, essentially. So this is all diaphragm, all of that. So, and this is what I really like right here. Ooh, hello, going the wrong direction. I have left-right issues. Okay, this is the from top-down view of your diaphragm, essentially, inside your body. So you can see the spine is at the bottom here, and the front of your chest would be at the top of this image. And you can see it's a big muscle, and it just goes from your sternum to your spine and all the way around, right? It's pretty big, it's bowl-shaped, and it has holes in it for veins and arteries, major veins and arteries to pass through, and, you know, things like that, right? It's pretty important. And your esophagus passes through it, so it's pretty big. And it's deep in there, but you don't sense it, do you? Right? So, like, if you're just hanging out at home, watching TV or watching a movie or whatever, and you're just sitting and breathing, okay? Just relaxed, regular old, default breath. You're using your diaphragm to do that. The diaphragm's doing most of the work on the inhale when you're doing that, when you're just hanging out and breathing. And you don't notice it, do you? Like, you don't feel it. You don't feel it contract. You don't feel it release. Like, it's not like you're doing curls with your diaphragm, right? Like, you're just hanging out, you know, getting your diaphragm all pumped up. It's not quite the same sensation, right? So I don't like talking about it very much. You can indirectly affect what the diaphragm is doing on the inhale, because that is where it's active. So if you release your abdominal wall, yeah, the diaphragm drops a little further. That lets a little more air in because your lungs are attached to the diaphragm through connective tissue. The lungs expand more, air flows in. But you also have a rib cage that your lungs are attached to. And the rib cage makes up 75% of the surface area of your lungs. So if you are sitting up and you want to take a really big breath, like if I told you take a big breath like you're about to go underwater in a pool, you're about to do like a breathing competition. You remember that when you're little, right? And you like have to breathe, you have to hold your breath for as long as you can. If you're about to do that, tell me that you use your abdominals more so than your rib cage, right? So just sit up, don't lay down, but sit up and just do that. Let's take a big breath like I gotta go dive under the water for a while. Right? So much rib cage. Whoo! Really stretch that thing out. Because that 75% of your lung surface area of your lungs is connected through connective tissues to your rib cage. And so if you want to really expand your lungs out, your rib cage has to move, has to expand out to get those lungs to expand, right? So we're going to talk about abdominal wall, and we're going to talk about rib cage. And we're going to talk about sitting up, and we're going to talk about laying down. Because your body might be using different strategies depending on your body position and depending on what you're needing to use, your rib cage or your abdominal wall. And some of that actually depends on where you are in your exhale. So, here we go, folks. You ready? Buckle yourselves in, because it's going to be some bumpy airflow. Not really. That was a really bad reference. Oh my gosh. I love that, though. All About Eve, Betty Davis. Come on, represent. Strap, put on your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy night. I love that quote. Okay, moving on. So, a little bit about airflow. A little bit of physics here. Do not freak out. Do not turn off the video. It's going to be fun. I'm going to walk you through it. I know I said the word physics. It's not scary. Trust me. Super basic aerodynamic stuff, okay? Air, along with fluid and other things in the world, like to move from areas of high pressure to areas of low pressure, right? So, like, if you watch, I don't know anything about atmospheric pressures, really. I don't know, like, meteorology, but like when there's a high pressure system or a low pressure system, it's like, okay, wind changes, depending on things. So pressure has something to do with that, right? But yeah, so high pressure to low pressure. In the world of respiration, we consider atmospheric pressure wherever the heck you are, whatever elevation you're at, we consider that sort of your baseline. That's your zero, okay? Because relative to where you are atmosphere, in terms of atmospheric pressure, that is what your body's dealing with when it deals with inhales and exhales and how much pressure is in your lungs, what the air pressure is in your lungs relative to atmosphere, right? So we make that our baseline. That's zero, neutral, okay? And between that, in your lungs, you can be at neutral. It's usually the point where you're just, if you just sort of relax, like if I just lean back a little, gotta move my feet, lean back a little and just like breathe like normal, and then just let out a nice exhale to the point where like I feel like no effort is being made in my body whatsoever. Neutral, okay? Super, that's your baseline zero. That's where the air pressure in your lungs is equal to the atmosphere, and you feel no pull on air wanting to go in or out, whether your mouth is open or not. You can just, no airflow in or out, because my lungs are just hanging out at neutral, right? And I don't really feel like my muscles have to work that hard. I don't really have much going on at all. I'm just hanging out at neutral, okay? So that's baseline. If you're taking in a really big inhale, likely you're wanting to drive the air pressure in your lungs to positive relative to atmosphere. So the lungs have to expand in order to create negative pressure relative to the air, atmospheric pressure, so that air will flow into your lungs. And the more air that flows into your lungs, the higher the air pressure goes. So when you're done with your inhale, the summation of that is you have increased air pressure relative to atmosphere, okay? So if you do that, like you're gonna dive underwater, you go, and you hold it a little bit, and shake your shoulders so that they don't get too tight. Rib cage, right? Lots of rib cage. Whoa, really burning rib cage. Oh, because I created a really high pressure by pulling my ribs. I use muscles of inhalation. There's a whole group of them. It's not just intercostals, but there's this whole group of muscles that we call muscles of inhalation. It's essentially any muscle that pulls the rib cage open, that expands the rib cage, because that, through all those connective tissues, expands the lungs, and then as the lungs expand, kind of simultaneously with that, the air pressure becomes a little more negative relative to atmosphere and air flows in. And there's a certain point where you're going to end up with high pressure, and if I open up my air cavity and I open up my mouth, the air is going to flow out. I'm just going to want it to flow out, right? So I can do that. I can, right? It's super easy to let it out and go back down to atmospheric. Now, if I wanted to go a little longer on my exhale and let out a little more air past atmospheric zero, I can do that as well. So I can let out the biggest exhale I possibly can. And that, I'm going to start feeling some abs working probably. So you can try it with me. I'm going to start from kind of small inhale and just exhale as far as I can. Right? And I actually crunched a bit. It was like doing an ab workout. I pulled my abdominal wall toward my spine. That blew a lot of air out of my lungs. And at the end, you hear me kind of do that gaspy, because my lungs were at such negative pressure that, relative to atmosphere, that just getting back to neutral even required airflow back in, okay? So, depends on where you're at in your breathing cycle. If you want to use your abdominal wall, if it's more effective to use your abdominal wall versus your ribcage wall. Because neutral is kind of where your body's default will be. If you're sitting up, or even laying down, but your neutral atmospheric, that's where you have like no muscles needed really to help you out, okay? And there's no airflow in or out. But if you want airflow in and out relative to atmospheric pressure, you need some active, usually muscle, you need some active forces essentially to move your lungs, either make them smaller or make them larger. You need air to go in or out, okay? Whatever stage. Usually for singing, since we want to have a large inhale because we want to have a long exhale, and we want control over our exhale. We don't want it to all go out at once, right? We don't want, that would be really short. Breathe in. Right? If I just let it all out. It's like, not much singing and I'm letting it out. I can't even voice to let it out that fast, right? So we want a little resistance to that air going out. And we want a little control over it. So we want a big inhale, and usually at least to start our exhale, at least for me anyway, I want a little ribcage action. I want the muscles of inhalation to check my inhalation, or check my exhalation, sorry. You want it to break it. So it's called inhalatory braking or inhalatory checking. Inspiratory checking, inspiratory braking, sorry. Inspiratory is the actual term. So braking, checking, and it literally is like putting on the brakes from exhaling. So it's like, it's like if you were swimming and you want to let out your air slowly, right? Like if you go underwater and you want a nice, easy stream of air coming out of your body, you might be, water's a little different because, your weight, your body weight is handled a little differently in water, right? You're not hanging out in your nice atmospheric air like we normally do if you're not a fish. My mom used to call me a fish. I like swimming. But you have this like big inhale, and to keep it all from rushing out at once, I need to use muscles, and I feel very active burning around my rib cage personally, to keep my air from going out all at once, to keep some control over it. And that lets me get a little bit of that. Now, if I get below atmospheric zero in my singing, right, phrase, like especially if it's a Mozart aria, holy cow, right? Like you're doing that dude's arias and you're up in those passaggio, like, you're up really high and he's just singing forever. You might end up pulling a little bit on your abdominals by the end because you might go past atmospheric zero and start, in order to keep airflow going out, you actually got to use your muscles of exhalation to let you out, right? I personally think this whole leaning on the breath, this whole appoggio idea, personally, it sounds an awful lot like inspiratory braking to me. It sounds like you want to resist the airflow going out of your body. You want some control over that in a way that's still flexible. It's not like you're holding your breath. You're still kind of flexible, you're still letting it out, but you have control over it so that it stays a pretty steady stream throughout your phrase, throughout your voicing, right? So you're not hitting it super hard, letting it all out at once, and you're not holding it in, holding it back too much, right? You're not underdoing, you're not overdoing. You just keep a nice control over it, okay? Now, couple of things about this. So now you know you can use your abdominal wall is mostly exhalation. It can release a little on inhalation to allow the diaphragm to go down. So pushing out with the abdominal wall is actually more of a releasing of the abdominal wall because your abdominals pull in, they make you rigid, right? Like when you're doing a crunch, or if you have your transverse abdominis, that really deep, really strong abdominal muscle, that's the suck-in muscle. It pulls your abdominal wall back toward your spine. So if you're in your bikini and you want to look all nice, I don't really wear bikinis, but like, you want to look all nice, right? And you don't want to have to wear Spanx with that dress. You're gonna have to suck in a little, right, ladies? And dudes too. You guys suck in your tummy sometimes. Let's face the facts. All right. So that's a thing, and you got to get used to it. Okay. So that's the idea. You got that abdominal wall and the rib cage. Okay. I know this video is already getting kind of long, but let's talk a little bit about what if you're laying down. Your stomach moves a lot when you lay down, right? It does. Your tummy goes up when your diaphragm descends down. And in that case, it's actually more of your diaphragm movement that's actually making your abdominal wall raise up. And then your abdominal wall can just relax and release down, right? The muscles just release and then poof, the air goes out. It is mostly in your stomach when you're laying down because you're dealing with the force of gravity. Your body was made on the earth with gravity. We evolved here. We really did. And our body reacts in gravity very well, right? So the way muscles combine, the way they, unify to create a certain coordination or certain movement, desired movement, varies depending on body position. If you've ever done any sort of ab work in the gym, you know this instinctually, right? Because you could do your abs, you could do your plank pose where you have to resist gravity going down with your abs, and you can hold them in, make your body really rigid and straight. You could also go, resisting gravity the other way where you're laying on your back and you're trying to pull yourself up against gravity, right? It's like there's all these different ways of doing your ab workout, and it always involves resisting gravity. So if you want to resist your exhalation, if you don't want it all to go out all at once, you have to resist gravity. The pull of gravity is one of the biggest pulls that makes your ribcage want to just poof, release, right? Back to neutral. So if I take a big inhale and I let it out all the way, like just let it out back to neutral, it's actually more of the releasing of the inhalation muscles and then gravity, poof, pulling on my ribcage, popping it back down. And also the tissues just want to go back to where their neutral is anyway. I mean, there's elasticity. It's like rubber band. Rubber bands wants to snap back to where it was. That happens also for your bodily tissues. So there's a bit of that too. We call these passive forces in respiratory science. So passive forces like gravity and the recoil of your muscles or your tissues of your body, that stuff is stuff that you don't directly control, so you don't feel it as much. You feel the net effect of it. Your rib cage goes down. But in your brain, you couldn't really necessarily say, like, what muscle contracted when I just released it to neutral. Didn't really feel like a contraction, and it happened really fast because it really wasn't probably much of a contraction. It was probably more passive forces working. I just gave in to the forces at work. I gave into gravity. I gave into the desire to recoil. I released the muscle contractions that were keeping my ribcage out, and I went right to neutral, right? So what I want to the reason I want to bring this up for singers is the passive forces really matter, especially if you're doing blocking or staging or dancing. If you need to lay down on the floor and sing a high note, your breathing strategy will probably need to change. You'll probably need to practice it a little, play with it a little while you're down on the ground. The rib cage might not be the controlling factor. It might be your stomach. Also, total side note, gravity will work better on your body. Actually, not a side note. It is relevant. Gravity will work better on work differently on your body based off of your weight and your body's shape. So if you happen to be pear-shaped and you carry a lot of weight in your abdomen, then that has a pull of gravity, right? Gravity's going to be pulling on that weight down. So your abdominal wall is essentially already relaxed, and in order to pull your abdominal wall back, that probably takes a lot of effort and energy. So you have a natural pull on your exhalation. You have a natural checking by the weight that's there, by a passive force of gravity pulling on your abdominal weight. And I think this is why a lot of singers, if they happen to lose weight, there's a couple of things that could happen with create some change in your voice. You could, number one, have a systemic change. So let's say you have hypothyroidism, you gained a lot of weight, and now the thyroid is balanced out, so now you lose your weight. Well, you've had some hormonal shifts, so that anything that affects the whole body system might affect your voice as well. So your vocal folds might be a little different. But also, your breathing might be different because your body's shape might have changed. You might not be quite as pear-shaped as you used to be. You might be more of an hourglass. Who knows? You might be more of a straight body. Who knows? But now you might need to use more of your your muscles of inhalation on your rib cage, more of the active forces of contracting those inhalatory muscles on your rib cage to resist your exhale. Okay? So if you're a singer who happened to drop a ton of weight, you might have used a lot of your abdominal wall was naturally providing this checking. Like your exhaling was naturally slow and easy for you. But now that you've dropped that weight off your abdomen, gravity is going to interact with your body a little differently. And to resist gravity now, instead of relying passively on just weight being there and giving enough force, gravity can pull enough on it, now you have to actually actively counter gravity. And it'll probably involve a lot of your rib cage. So if you want to work on rib cage and you don't want your shoulders to raise up, because that's not super ideal, because this looks really weird to sing and it's also pretty tense, right? Think really low. Think bottom of the rib cage. Take breaths really low toward the bottom of the rib cage. And then honestly, I just like to sit there and do a really slow, light exhale and play with my shoulders. Movement is the opposite of tension. I had a really great teacher tell me that once. And and that's the idea. You just want to breathe in and when I feel myself do this, I'm just gonna move my neck, roll my shoulders, and keep my rib cage working for me. It just helps to get a sense for when my shoulders are active, and it just helps to release those muscles to not do it, right? So that's another kind of tip. I know this is already getting crazy long. This might be a 30-minute vidya, but okay. Let's do a quickie review here. Big difference with singing, breathing for singing versus breathing for talking is that you probably want to take in a large inhale, but you still want vocal flexibility, right? You still want to be able to do loud and soft. Okay. So you want to be able to control your exhale in order to do that. You have to have a nice control of your exhale so that you're loud and soft and your voice can just be a choice. It doesn't have to just be default loud or something, right? So in order to control your exhale, you have options. You have your abdominal wall that you can use, and you have your rib cage, or you could do a combination of both. You could have a release of your abdominal wall and a nice increase in your rib cage, which for ideal, opera singers, when you want the maximum inhale, that's probably what opera singers will want to do. They want to really, that pelvic release that people talk about is getting even more drop in that abdominal wall, getting a little more from the diaphragm, right? You let a lot in, okay? Now you want to control that exhale out. If you are sitting up, if you are straight up and down, and you don't have a lot of abdominal weight, you're not super pear-shaped in your body naturally, you probably will feel a lot of activity in your rib cage because the inspiratory muscles are braking the exhalation that wants to occur because your tissues want to recoil back to where they were before you took that big breath, and gravity wants to pull your rib cage down. If you happen to carry a lot of weight in your abdomen, if you're pear-shaped like that and you have a pretty good amount of weight there, the force of gravity will be pretty strong, so when you exhale, you'll already have a bit of braking from just the force of gravity on the weight, probably. So the rib cage becomes a little less vital for you. If you lose weight and you've changed your body shape, you need to play around a little more with your rib cage. You probably need to strengthen it a little bit, because that is going to affect your singing. You've probably lost your relationship. Your strategy for respiration has shifted, and you have to get used to that shift, and you have to learn how to cope with that shift. If you are laying down, your relationship to gravity has shifted, and you, for reals, and you have to figure out how you're going to take a breath in, and likely your abdomen will move more, because your rib cage isn't as effective against gravity when you're laying down. Rib cage moves more three-dimensionally, and the joints are in the back, so if you're laying on your back, it's not as effective probably as your abdominal wall and your abdominal cavity for your breathing, your inhale and your exhale. If you are going from super high pressure in your lungs relative to atmospheric pressure from a really big inhale, and then you have to go past your neutral point, your abdominal wall will probably kick in a little bit. Idea there is, don't kick it in consciously so much that you make yourself really rigid and really tight. Just let it happen naturally. Your brain knows how to do it. Let it just let it happen. Just get out of its way, essentially, okay? Don't think of pulling it in. Just let it switch into that strategy and it'll do just fine for you. Trust me on that, okay? You don't have to think too hard about it. Also, total side note, another interesting thing, if you are wearing period costumes and you have like a corset on or something, that extra sensation of the release of the abdominal wall can feel like you're actively pushing your abs out. It really can, you know? But it's because you have a little resistance to the muscles releasing. So that, it's like an abdominal truss, essentially. You have this like stiff fabric here, and even in your rib cage too, if it's a corset, heck, let's face the facts. Your whole torso has this stiff, rigid material that is preventing it wanting to resist the expansion of your inhalation. So some people really like that sensation because you feel like you really have to work to inhale, and that gives that feeling, that resistance makes you kind of puts you right in that spot where you feel like, okay, my inhalation muscles are working really well. I know what that feeling is. This, I think, personally, totally my opinion, but when you read the old pedagogical treatises, the back in the 18th century, and people talk about, you know, the feeling of the abdominal walls forcing themselves out, right? I think we know that the abdominal muscles do not push out. They just release out, okay? They are not active when you're pushing, okay? Out, all right? You're usually doing that like with your back probably. Your back and your butt, your pelvis, you're changing your position a little. You're not actually pushing out your abdominals, but you're releasing your abdominals out. And if you think about it, back in the 18th century or so, around the era of bel canto, everybody wore corsets all the time, you guys. Like everything they wore was stiff, rigid material. Even the guys, they had layers and layers upon a stiff material. Those coats were stiff, come on, breeches, all this stuff, right? So that wasn't a costume to them, that was reality. So when they breathed, they probably had a very strong sensation of the parts of their body that were moving to let in a large inhale because of the clothing they wore. So consider that when you read those treatises and stuff, if you're reading back in the bel canto era, the 18th century, 19th century, consider the fact that those people's clothing was so different and very restrictive. So their sensation of inhalation and exhalation were probably quite different than ours, just based off of the clothes of the era compared to what we currently wear. So it's just something to keep in mind. But your body really knows what it's doing. You can just play around with taking big inhales, keeping those shoulders down, and just seeing how do you control it? How do you keep yourself being like a really leaky tire, not like a shh, but how do you keep the airflow minimum, but still keep a little more looseness elsewhere in your body? Because that's what you're going to use when you sing. You're going to use sort of a minimal airflow, because you have a very small space to blow through. You don't want to be like blowing a ton of air through there. It doesn't take a lot of air to set vocal folds into motion. You don't need a huge airflow. It's actually a very subtle little airflow, really. But you need control over that. So that's it. That's the physiology breathing. Woo! Physiology breathing. Woo! Breathing. Yeah. Total side note, I've been watching way too much Parks and Rec, so I'm probably the worst, essentially, at the just busting out the singing today. Okay! Got any more questions for me? Sorry this is a long video, but hey, breathing's pretty darn important. Up next is larynx. If you have any questions, though, feel free to post some questions. I'll try to keep up with those comments and see if there are any. If anyone out there is watching these videos at all at some point in the future, hopefully. And yeah, so up next is larynx, laryngeal function, and vocal folds. And there will be some aerodynamics, there will be some physics, but no math, okay? I'm going to walk you through it. You're going to be fine. You're smart. You're wicked smart. You can totally handle this, okay? All right, and I'm not from Boston. All right, see you guys next time. Bye.